The helicopter blades cut through the Afghan night sky like angry wasps, their rhythmic beating barely audible over the chaos below. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen pressed his back against the cold metal wall of the Black Hawk, his medical kit secured tightly to his chest. The radio crackled with urgent voices reporting casualties from the village raid that had gone wrong. Marcus had been a Navy SEAL medic for 8 years, long enough to know that no mission ever went exactly as planned. But tonight felt different. The intelligence had been solid, a high-value target hiding in a remote compound near the Pakistan border. What they hadn't expected was the heavy resistance from well-armed insurgents who seemed to know they were coming. 2 minutes out, the pilot shouted over the engine noise. Marcus checked his gear one final time. His medical bag contained everything he might need: trauma dressings, tourniquets, morphine, saline bags, and the countless other supplies that could mean the difference between life and death in the field. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. Marcus jumped out immediately, following his team leader toward the sounds of gunfire. The village was a maze of mud brick houses and narrow alleyways, illuminated only by the occasional muzzle flash and the eerie green glow of night vision goggles. "Medic! We need a medic over here." The voice came from behind a low stone wall where 2 SEALs were providing cover fire. Marcus sprinted toward them, keeping low to avoid the bullets whistling overhead. When he reached their position, he saw Petty Officer Rodriguez clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "Just a graze," Rodriguez said through gritted teeth, but Martinez took one in the leg. "He's about 50 meters that way, behind the white building." Marcus applied a quick pressure bandage to Rodriguez's shoulder and injected him with a mild painkiller. "You'll be fine. Stay here and keep pressure on that wound." Then he grabbed his kit and moved toward Martinez's position, using the shadows and destroyed walls for cover. The white building Rodriguez had mentioned was actually more of a ruin now, its walls pockmarked with bullet holes and one corner completely blown away by an explosive. Marcus found Martinez behind what remained of the structure, his left leg wrapped in a makeshift tourniquet fashioned from his belt. "About time you showed up, Doc," Martinez said with a weak smile. Despite his joke, Marcus could see the pain in his eyes and the concerning amount of blood on the ground around him. Marcus quickly assessed the wound. The bullet had passed through Martinez's thigh, missing the major arteries but causing significant muscle damage. He would need immediate evacuation to a field hospital for proper surgery. As Marcus worked to stabilize Martinez, applying a proper tourniquet and starting an IV line, he heard footsteps approaching from the alley behind them. His hand instinctively moved to his sidearm, but Martinez grabbed his wrist. "Wait," Martinez whispered. "I think it's a civilian." A figure emerged from the shadows, a young woman wearing traditional Afghan clothing, her head covered by a dark hijab. She appeared to be in her 20s with intelligent dark eyes that reflected both fear and determination. What caught Marcus's attention immediately was the blood on her clothes and the way she favored her left arm. She spoke in accented English, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need help. There are wounded people in the house behind you. Children." Marcus looked at Martinez, who nodded despite his pain. "I'm stable for now, Doc. Go help them." The woman led Marcus through a gap in the wall to a small courtyard where several people were huddled together. An elderly man held a cloth against a head wound, while a young boy, maybe 8 years old, lay unconscious with blood on his shirt. A woman cradled a crying infant, and 2 teenage girls pressed themselves against the far wall, their eyes wide with terror. Marcus immediately went to work on the unconscious boy, checking his pulse and breathing. The child had taken shrapnel to his abdomen, and his condition was critical. As Marcus prepared to treat him, the young woman who had brought him here knelt beside him. "I can help," she said quietly. "I have medical training." Marcus glanced at her skeptically. While local people sometimes had basic first aid knowledge, this was a complex trauma situation that required advanced medical skills. But when she began helping him position the boy properly and handed him supplies before he asked for them, he realized she knew what she was doing. "What's your name?" Marcus asked as they worked together to stabilize the child. "Amira," she replied, not looking up from her task. "And you should know that more insurgents are coming. My brother saw them moving through the eastern part of the village about 10 minutes ago." Marcus's radio crackled with his team leader's voice. "All units, be advised we have movement from the east. Possible reinforcements heading our way." As if responding to the radio call, The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the direction Amira had indicated. The gunfire was closer now and getting closer by the minute. "We need to move these people," Marcus said, looking around the courtyard. "This position isn't safe," Amira shook her head. "The old man cannot walk far, and the boy needs surgery soon or he will die." Marcus found himself in an impossible situation. His training told him to evacuate Martinez and return to his unit. But his oath as a medic compelled him to help anyone who needed medical attention, regardless of whether they were military or civilian, American or Afghan. The decision was made for him when a rocket-propelled grenade exploded against the building next to them, showering the courtyard with debris and dust. The blast knocked everyone to the ground and left Marcus's ears ringing. When the dust settled, he saw that Amira had thrown herself over the wounded boy, protecting him from the falling rubble. She looked up at Marcus, and for a moment their eyes met. In that instant, Marcus saw something that made him pause. A recognition. A familiarity that shouldn't have been there. Before he could process what he had seen, another explosion rocked the area, this one even closer. Marcus knew they were running out of time. Whatever was happening in this village was bigger than a simple raid gone wrong, and somehow this woman named Amira was at the center of it all. The explosions had stopped, but Marcus could hear boots running through the alleyways around them. Voices shouted in multiple languages, English, Pashto, and what sounded like Russian. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Marcus realized they were caught in the middle of something much larger than a standard military operation. Amira moved with practiced efficiency, checking on each of the wounded civilians while Marcus continued working on the unconscious boy. Her movements were too precise, too professional for someone who just happened to have medical training. When she retrieved a field dressing from a hidden pocket in her robes and applied it with military precision to the elderly man's head wound, Marcus's suspicions began to crystallize. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked quietly, not taking his eyes off the boy's vital signs. "I worked at the clinic in Kabul," Amira replied, but her answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Marcus had spent enough time in Afghanistan to know that rural women rarely had access to advanced medical education, especially the kind of trauma training she was demonstrating. Her English was also too good, with an accent that seemed to shift between regions. A burst of gunfire echoed from the alley where he had left Martinez. Marcus grabbed his radio. "Rodriguez, what's your status?" Static answered him for several seconds before Rodriguez's voice came through, strained and urgent. "Doc, we've got problems. Martinez is stable, but we're pinned down. These aren't regular insurgents. They've got professional equipment and they know our tactics." Marcus's mind raced. Professional equipment, knowledge of American tactics, and a woman with advanced medical training in a village that was supposed to contain only rural farmers. The pieces were starting to form a picture he didn't like. "Amira," he said, keeping his voice calm while continuing to work on the boy, "I need you to tell me the truth. Who are you, really?" She looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes calculating. "I am who I said I am. A woman trying to help wounded people." Another explosion shook the building, closer this time. Dust rained down from the damaged ceiling and the infant began crying louder. The teenage girls pressed themselves further against the wall, whimpering in fear. Marcus made a decision that went against his training. He reached into his medical kit and pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone, but was actually a military-grade communication and identification scanner. He had used it before to verify the identities of local informants and suspected insurgents. "Give me your hand," he said to Amira. She pulled back slightly. "Why?" "Because I need to know if you're going to get my team killed," Marcus said bluntly. "This device can scan fingerprints and run them against military databases. If you're who you say you are, you have nothing to worry about." Amira stared at the device, then at Marcus. For the first time since he had met her, she looked uncertain. The confident, helpful demeanor wavered, and Marcus saw something else underneath. Calculation, fear, and what might have been resignation. "You would not believe me if I told you the truth," she said finally. "Try me." Before Amira could respond, footsteps approached the courtyard entrance. Marcus instinctively reached for his weapon, but Amira placed a hand on his arm to stop him. "Wait," she whispered. "I know who it is." A man appeared at the entrance, tall, bearded, wearing local clothing but moving with military bearing. When he saw Amira, he spoke rapidly in what Marcus recognized as Farsi, not Pashto. Amira responded in the same language. their conversation brief but intense. Marcus didn't speak Farsi, but he understood enough to catch a few key words: American, medic, and extraction. The man looked at Marcus with obvious suspicion, his hand resting on a concealed weapon. "He wants to know if you can be trusted," Amira translated. "Trusted with what?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand that he had stumbled into an operation that had nothing to do with the raid his team was conducting. Amira looked at the wounded boy, who was stabilizing under Marcus's care but still needed proper medical attention. She looked at the other civilians, all of whom were watching her with expressions that suggested she was more than just another village woman. Finally, she looked back at Marcus. "My name is Amira Nazari," she said. "I am a captain in Iranian intelligence, and I have been working undercover in this region for 18 months. Marcus felt his world shift. An Iranian intelligence officer, here in Afghanistan, in the middle of an American military operation. The implications were staggering and potentially catastrophic. "These people are not random civilians," Amira continued. "They are Iranian nationals who were supposed to be extracted tonight. The operation was compromised, and now we are trapped between your military forces and Afghan insurgents who want to capture us for bounty money." The bearded man spoke again, more urgently this time. Amira nodded and turned back to Marcus. "Hassan says your team's communication frequencies have been intercepted. The insurgents know where you are and they are moving to surround this area." Marcus's radio crackled again. This time it was his team leader's voice, tight with stress. "All units, we have been compromised. Execute emergency extraction protocol. All personnel move to backup landing zone immediately." Emergency extraction meant the mission was a complete failure, and everyone needed to get out as quickly as possible. It also meant that Marcus was supposed to abandon any non-essential personnel and focus only on getting his team to safety. But looking around the courtyard at the wounded civilians who were actually Iranian intelligence assets, Marcus realized that the line between friend and enemy had become very blurred. These people had been helping American forces by providing intelligence about insurgent movements in the region. Amira herself had probably saved American lives with the information she had gathered. "If I help you," Marcus said to Amira, "I'm technically committing treason." "If you don't help us," she replied, "you will be responsible for the deaths of people who have been risking their lives to keep your soldiers safe." Hassan spoke again, pointing toward the eastern edge of the village where muzzle flashes were becoming more frequent. The insurgents were definitely closing in, and they would reach the courtyard within minutes. Marcus looked at his scanner again. He could verify Amira's identity and potentially learn exactly what kind of operation he had stumbled into. But using the device would also send a signal that could be tracked by anyone monitoring military communications in the area. The unconscious boy stirred slightly, his breathing becoming more stable. The elderly man's bleeding had stopped, and the other civilians were looking to Amira for guidance. Whatever decision Marcus made in the next few seconds would determine not only his own fate, but the fate of everyone in the courtyard. His radio crackled one more time. "Doc, where are you? We're leaving in 2 minutes with or without you." Marcus looked at Amira, who was watching him with an expression that mixed hope with resignation. She had risked her life to help wounded people, including a child who wasn't even part of her mission. That had to count for something. "Can you walk?" he asked her. "Yes, but the others cannot move quickly." Marcus made his choice. He activated his emergency beacon, which would signal his team that he was alive but unable to reach the extraction point. Then he began packing his medical supplies. "Then we're going to have to find another way out of here." Marcus worked quickly to stabilize the wounded boy for transport, while Hassan and Amira spoke in hushed Farsi. The sound of gunfire was getting closer, and Marcus could hear his team's helicopters in the distance, their engines growing fainter as they departed without him. "There is a smuggler's tunnel beneath the mosque," Amira said, kneeling beside Marcus as he finished bandaging the boy's wounds. "It leads to the valley on the other side of the ridge. But we will have to carry him." Marcus looked around the courtyard. Besides the unconscious boy, they had an elderly man with a head injury, a woman with an infant, and 2 teenage girls who were clearly terrified. Hassan appeared to be uninjured but was obviously military trained. Amira was favoring her left arm, though she had been hiding the extent of her injury. "Show me your arm," Marcus said to her. "It is not important right now. It is if you're going to help me carry people through a tunnel." Marcus's tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, Amira pulled back her sleeve to reveal a deep gash on her forearm, probably from shrapnel. The wound was still bleeding and would need stitches, but it wasn't immediately life-threatening. Marcus quickly cleaned and bandaged the wound. "You should have told me about this earlier." "I have had worse injuries," Amira replied. "Besides, you had more important patients." Hassan spoke urgently to Amira, gesturing toward the alley entrance. The insurgents had found their position and were approaching the courtyard. "We need to move now," Amira translated. Marcus lifted the unconscious boy carefully, supporting his head and keeping pressure on the abdominal wound. The child was small for his age, probably malnourished. But Marcus was still carrying extra weight with his medical kit and weapons. Hassan helped the elderly man to his feet, while Amira assisted the woman with the infant. The two teenage girls stayed close together, following Amira's whispered instructions in Pashto. They moved through a gap in the back wall of the courtyard, entering a narrow alley that ran between two collapsed buildings. The mosque Amira had mentioned was barely visible in the darkness, its minaret silhouetted against the star-filled sky. As they made their way through the rubble-strewn path, Marcus's mind continued processing what Amira had told him. Iranian intelligence operating in Afghanistan wasn't unusual. Iran had significant interests in their neighbors' stability. But an 18-month undercover operation suggested something much more complex than simple intelligence gathering. "What exactly have you been doing here for a year and a half?" Marcus whispered as they walked. "Mapping insurgent supply routes," Amira replied quietly. "The weapons and explosives being used against your forces are coming through specific channels. Our government wanted to identify them. Why would Iran want to help American forces?" Amira was quiet for a moment. "Because some of those weapons are also being used against Iranian interests in the region. The enemy of my enemy, as they say." They reached the mosque, which had been partially destroyed in the fighting. Hassan led them to a side entrance that was hidden behind fallen stone blocks. He moved the blocks aside to reveal a narrow wooden door, barely wide enough for one person. Inside, the mosque was dark and filled with debris. Hassan produced a small flashlight and led them toward what appeared to be a solid wall near the back of the building. When he pressed against a specific stone, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that sloped downward into darkness. "The tunnel was built during the Soviet occupation," Amira explained. "It connects to a natural cave system that runs under the mountains." Marcus looked at the narrow passage and then at the injured boy in his arms. "How long is this tunnel?" "About 2 kilometers to the exit point. 2 kilometers underground while carrying wounded people with insurgents pursuing them." Marcus had been through worse situations during his SEAL training, but never while responsible for civilians. Hassan went first, his flashlight providing the only illumination. The tunnel was barely tall enough for Marcus to walk upright, and the walls were rough stone that scraped against his equipment. Behind him, he could hear the woman with the infant whispering prayers in Farsi. They had been walking for about 10 minutes when Marcus heard voices echoing from behind them. The insurgents had found the mosque and were searching it. If they discovered the hidden entrance, everyone in the tunnel would be trapped with nowhere to run. "How much farther to the first chamber?" Marcus asked Amira. "Maybe 500 meters. Why?" "Because we need to pick up the pace." Marcus adjusted his grip on the unconscious boy and began moving faster. The child's breathing was steady, but Marcus was worried about internal bleeding. Without proper surgical facilities, the boy might not survive much longer. The tunnel began to widen, and Marcus could smell fresher air ahead of them. Hassan's flashlight illuminated a larger chamber carved out of the natural rock. Ancient Islamic calligraphy was carved into the walls, and Marcus realized they were in a much older structure than the modern smuggling tunnel. "This was a pilgrimage site centuries ago," Amira said, noticing Marcus examining the carvings. "The tunnel builders used the existing caves to hide their work." Hassan spoke to Amira and pointed toward 2 passages leading out of the chamber. She nodded and turned to Marcus. "Hassan says the insurgents have found the tunnel entrance. We need to choose a route. The left passage leads to the original exit point, but it is longer. The right passage is shorter but more dangerous. It comes out near an insurgent camp." Marcus looked at the wounded boy whose breathing was becoming more labored. They were running out of time for medical evacuation, but walking into an insurgent camp would be suicide. "There is a third option," Amira said quietly. My extraction team was supposed to meet me at coordinates about 1 kilometer north of here. If they are still waiting? Your extraction team, Marcus repeated. Iranian military? Quds Force, Amira confirmed, referring to the elite special operations unit of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Marcus felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Quds Force didn't run simple intelligence operations. They were involved in the most sensitive and dangerous missions in the region. Whatever Amira had been doing for 18 months was far more important than mapping supply routes. Voices echoed from the tunnel behind them, closer now. The insurgents had definitely found the hidden entrance and were following their trail. If we go to your extraction team, Marcus said, what happens to me? I do not know, Amira answered honestly. But if we stay here, we all die. Marcus looked around the chamber at the group of people depending on him for their survival. The elderly man was struggling to stay conscious. The woman with the infant looked exhausted. The teenage girls were barely holding themselves together. And the boy in his arms was running out of time. Hassan spoke urgently to Amira, pointing back toward the tunnel entrance. Marcus could hear the voices getting louder and see the faint glow of flashlights in the distance. They are maybe 10 minutes behind us, Amira translated. Marcus made his second life-changing decision of the night. Lead the way to your extraction team. They took the middle passage, which angled upward toward the surface. Marcus's legs burned from carrying the boy, and his medical kit felt heavier with each step. But he focused on the sound of the child's breathing and the knowledge that every step took them further from the pursuing insurgents. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Hassan stopped and pointed upward. Marcus could see a faint circle of starlight above them, the exit point. Hassan climbed up first to check the area, then signaled for the others to follow. Marcus emerged from the tunnel into a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings. The village was visible in the distance, flames rising from several buildings. Amira pulled out a small device and pressed a button. Moments later, an answering signal flashed from a position about 500 meters to the north. My team, she said with obvious relief. But as they began moving toward the signal, Marcus realized that his problems were just beginning. He was about to meet Iranian special forces while carrying classified American military equipment. Whether he survived the next hour would depend entirely on what Amira told them about him. The Iranian extraction team materialized out of the darkness like ghosts. Marcus counted at least 6 figures in full tactical gear. Their weapons trained on him before they even fully emerged from their concealed positions. They moved with the precision of elite operators, taking positions that covered all possible escape routes while maintaining clear fields of fire. Marcus stopped walking and carefully lowered the wounded boy to the ground, keeping his hands visible. The unconscious child was still breathing, but his pulse was getting weaker. Without immediate medical attention, he wouldn't survive another hour. Amira spoke rapidly in Farsi to what appeared to be the team leader, a tall man with intelligent eyes visible through his night vision goggles. The conversation was intense but brief. Marcus caught a few words he recognized, including American, medic, and children. The team leader approached Marcus, his rifle lowered but ready. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. You are United States Navy? Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, Navy SEAL medic, Marcus replied. These people need immediate medical attention. The Iranian officer studied Marcus for a long moment, then looked at the wounded boy on the ground. Professional recognition passed between them, one military medic acknowledging another's work. I am Major Rostami, the officer said. Captain Nazari says you saved her life and the lives of these civilians. I did my job, Marcus replied simply. Major Rostami gestured to his team, and 2 medics came forward with a field stretcher. They began examining the wounded boy while Rostami continued questioning Marcus. Your unit conducted a raid tonight targeting our operation? Marcus shook his head. We were targeting an insurgent leader. We had no knowledge of your people in the area. Yet you chose to help Captain Nazari instead of returning to your team. I took an oath to preserve life, regardless of nationality. Rostami nodded slowly, then spoke in Farsi to one of his men. The soldier approached Marcus and gestured for him to remove his equipment. Marcus hesitated. His weapons and communication gear contained classified technology that could compromise American operations if it fell into foreign hands. Major, I can't allow my equipment to be compromised, Marcus said. And I cannot allow an American Special Forces operator to retain weapons while meeting with Iranian intelligence personnel, Rostami replied. We have reached what you might call an impasse. Amira stepped forward, still favoring her injured arm. Major, this man risked his life to save civilians. He has shown honor. Perhaps we can find a compromise. Rostami considered this, then made a decision that surprised Marcus. You may retain your sidearm and medical equipment, but your communication devices and any intelligence-gathering equipment must be secured. Marcus removed his radio, satellite communicator, and the military scanner he had planned to use on Amira. He kept his pistol, medical kit, and basic survival gear. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being completely disarmed in hostile territory. The Iranian medics had stabilized the wounded boy and were preparing to transport him. One of them spoke to Major Rostami, who nodded grimly. The child needs surgery within 2 hours, Rostami told Marcus. We have a field hospital 20 kilometers from here, but reaching it requires crossing territory controlled by the Taliban. Marcus looked at the boy, whose skin was becoming pale and clammy despite the warm night air. He's developing shock. 2 hours might be optimistic. There is another option, Amira said quietly. The American base at Bagram has a trauma center 30 kilometers south of here. Their helicopters could reach us in 20 minutes. Marcus stared at her. You want to call for American medical evacuation to save an Iranian intelligence asset? I want to save a child's life, Amira replied. His nationality is irrelevant. Major Rostami spoke to his team in Farsi, clearly explaining the situation. Marcus could see disagreement on several faces, but the major's authority was absolute. After a brief discussion, he turned back to Marcus. If we call for American medical evacuation, what happens to our operation? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but I know doctors and medics. They'll treat the boy first and ask questions later. The elderly man suddenly collapsed, his head wound, apparently more serious than Marcus had initially assessed. Marcus immediately went to check on him while the Iranian medics continued working on the unconscious boy. He's having a stroke, Marcus announced after checking the man's pupils and reflexes. The head trauma must have caused internal bleeding. Now they had 2 critical patients who needed immediate evacuation to a proper medical facility. The Iranian field hospital could probably handle one of them, but not both simultaneously. Major Rostami made a decision that spoke to his character as both a military officer and a human being. He pulled out a satellite phone and handed it to Marcus. Call your people, he said. Tell them you have multiple critical civilian casualties requiring immediate medical evacuation. Marcus took the phone, knowing that making this call would forever change his military career. American forces would respond to a medical emergency, but they would also investigate how he had ended up with Iranian special forces in the middle of nowhere. This is Staff Sergeant Chen, requesting immediate medical evacuation, Marcus said when the call connected to the base emergency coordinator. I have 2 critical civilian casualties, including a child with severe abdominal trauma. Current position. He looked at Major Rostami, who provided GPS coordinates. Copy that, Sergeant Chen. Medical evacuation en route. ETA 15 minutes. Be advised your unit reported you missing in action. Command wants to know your status. I'm uninjured and assisting with civilian casualties, Marcus replied. I'll provide a full report upon return to base. As they waited for the helicopter, Marcus continued treating both patients while the Iranian team maintained security. Amira sat beside him, helping monitor the boy's vital signs. What will happen to you when you return to your base? She asked quietly. I'll probably face a court-martial for abandoning my unit and fraternizing with foreign intelligence personnel, Marcus said, but these people will be alive. And what will happen to us? Marcus looked around at the Iranian team, who were professional soldiers doing their job in a complicated region. I don't know. That's above my pay grade. The sound of rotor blades echoed across the valley as an American medical helicopter approached their position. Major Rostami ordered his team to withdraw to defensive positions, leaving only himself, Amira, and Hassan visible when the aircraft landed. 2 flight medics jumped out with a stretcher, immediately taking over care of the wounded boy. Marcus briefed them quickly on both patients' conditions while they prepared for transport. We can take both patients and 1 additional person, the senior flight medic told Marcus. Who's coming with us? Marcus looked at Amira, who was clearly the logical choice to accompany the Iranian casualties. But taking her would mean bringing an Iranian intelligence officer to an American military base, which would create a diplomatic incident of enormous proportions. I need to go with them, Amira said. They are my responsibility. You understand what that means? Marcus asked. I understand that sometimes doing the right thing requires sacrifice. Major Rostami approached them as the medics loaded the patients into the helicopter. He spoke briefly with Amira in Farsi, then turned to Marcus. Captain Nazari will accompany the casualties to ensure they receive proper care. I trust that your medical personnel will treat her with the same professionalism she has shown tonight. Marcus nodded. They will. As the helicopter prepared to depart, Major Rostami handed Marcus a sealed envelope. For your commanding officer. It explains the circumstances of tonight's encounter. Marcus climbed into the helicopter beside Amira and the two patients. As they lifted off, he looked down at the Iranian team disappearing back into the darkness. In 15 minutes, he would have to explain to his superiors how he had ended up in an Iranian special operations extraction with 2 critical patients and a foreign intelligence officer. But for now, both patients were stable, and that was all that mattered to him as a medic. The helicopter touched down at Bagram Air Base with Marcus, Amira, and the 2 critical patients. Medical personnel immediately rushed the wounded boy and elderly man into the trauma center, while military police surrounded the aircraft. Marcus had expected this response. Arriving with an unidentified foreign national would trigger every security protocol on the base. Sergeant Chen, you need to come with us immediately, said a stern-faced military police captain. The woman stays here under guard until intelligence personnel can interview her. Marcus looked at Amira, who appeared calm, despite being surrounded by armed American soldiers. She's a non-combatant who helped save lives tonight, he told the MP captain. She should be treated as a protected person under the Geneva Conventions. That determination will be made by people above my rank, the captain replied. Right now my orders are to secure both of you for debriefing. As they were separated, Amira caught Marcus's eye and mouthed, "Thank you," in English. Marcus nodded, wondering if he would ever see her again and what would happen to her now that she was in American custody. Marcus was escorted to a windowless room in the base's intelligence facility, where he was met by his commanding officer, Commander Sarah Mitchell, and a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as CIA Station Chief David Reynolds. Sergeant Chen, Commander Mitchell began. You were reported missing in action 6 hours ago. Your team completed their extraction and returned to base without you. Explain. Marcus took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the night, starting with treating the wounded SEALs and ending with calling for medical evacuation. He handed over Major Rostami's sealed letter, which Reynolds immediately opened and read. According to this Iranian officer, Reynolds said, their intelligence team has been providing information about insurgent activities that has helped prevent attacks on American forces. Is that your understanding of the situation? I only know what Captain Nazari told me, Marcus replied, but her actions tonight suggest she was genuinely trying to protect civilian lives. Commander Mitchell leaned forward. Sergeant, do you understand the implications of what you've done? You abandoned your unit during a combat operation and provided aid to foreign intelligence personnel. In some contexts, that could be considered treason. With respect, Commander, I provided medical aid to wounded civilians and a foreign national who was helping American interests. My actions were consistent with my oath as a medic and my obligations under international law. Reynolds spoke up. The woman you brought here, Captain Nazari, what did she tell you about her mission? Marcus repeated what Amira had said about mapping insurgent supply routes and identifying weapons flows. Reynolds and Mitchell exchanged glances, suggesting they knew more about Iranian operations in the region than they were sharing. Sergeant Chen, Reynolds said carefully, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Captain Nazari has been one of our most valuable intelligence assets in the region. For the past 18 months, she has been providing information that has saved dozens of American lives. Marcus felt his world shift again. She's working for the CIA? Not exactly, Reynolds said. She's Iranian intelligence, but she's been sharing information with us through back channels. It's complicated, but essentially we have a mutual interest in preventing certain extremist groups from destabilizing the region. Commander Mitchell added, tonight's raid was actually designed to extract her and her team safely. The insurgent leader we were supposedly targeting was a cover story. Your unit wasn't briefed on the real mission for operational security reasons. Marcus stared at them both. So when I chose to help her instead of returning to my unit, I was actually completing the mission. In a manner of speaking, yes, Reynolds replied, though your methods were unconventional to say the least. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A medical officer entered and addressed Commander Mitchell. Ma'am, I have an update on the casualties Sergeant Chen brought in. The boy is stable after emergency surgery. He'll make a full recovery. The elderly man suffered a stroke but is expected to survive with some permanent disabilities. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. The decision to call for medical evacuation had been the right one, regardless of the political complications. What about Captain Nazari? Reynolds asked the medical officer. She's being treated for her arm wound. Nothing serious, but she was more injured than she let on. She also has signs of exhaustion and dehydration consistent with prolonged field operations. After the medical officer left, Reynolds turned back to Marcus. Sergeant, what I'm about to ask you requires a level of discretion that goes beyond normal military operations. Captain Nazari's cover has been compromised by tonight's events. She can't return to her previous assignment. What are you asking me to do? We need to debrief her thoroughly, and then arrange for her safe passage out of the region. During that process, we need someone she trusts to ensure she cooperates fully. Someone who has already proven he's willing to risk his life for her safety. Marcus understood what Reynolds was suggesting. You want me to be her handler? We want you to be her liaison, Commander Mitchell corrected. This would be a temporary assignment, probably 2 to 3 weeks while we complete the debriefing and arrange her extraction to a safe location. And if I refuse? Reynolds smiled grimly. Then you return to your unit and we handle Captain Nazari through normal intelligence channels. But given what happened tonight, I think she would be more cooperative with someone she already trusts. Marcus thought about Amira, her professionalism under fire, her willingness to risk herself for wounded civilians, and the trust she had shown by revealing her true identity to him. If she was genuinely helping American forces, she deserved better than being treated as a standard intelligence asset. What would this assignment involve? Primarily ensuring her safety and comfort while our intelligence analysts debrief her, Reynolds explained. She has 18 months' worth of information about insurgent networks, weapons trafficking, and foreign influence operations in the region. That intelligence could prevent hundreds of American casualties. Commander Mitchell leaned forward. Marcus, I won't lie to you. This assignment would be career-altering. You'd be working directly with the CIA on highly classified operations. That kind of exposure changes the trajectory of a military career permanently. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That depends on what you want to do with your life, Reynolds said. The CIA is always looking for military personnel with your skills and experience. This assignment could be the beginning of a very different kind of service to your country. Marcus thought about his 8 years as a SEAL medic, the countless missions, the lives saved, and the toll it had taken on his personal relationships. He had always focused on immediate tactical objectives: treat the wounded, complete the mission, get everyone home alive. But tonight had shown him that sometimes the bigger picture was more complicated than the tactical situation suggested. I need to see her first, Marcus said. I want to hear from Captain Nazari what she wants to do. Reynolds nodded. That's fair, but understand that her options are limited. She can cooperate with us and receive protection, or she can refuse and face uncertain consequences from both American and Iranian authorities. You mean she's essentially a prisoner? She's a foreign intelligence officer who voluntarily entered an American military base, Commander Mitchell said. Legally, we can hold her indefinitely for debriefing. Practically, we'd prefer her voluntary cooperation. Marcus stood up. I want to see her now. Reynolds escorted Marcus to the medical facility where Amira was being held in a secure room. 2 guards stood outside the door, but the room itself was comfortable, more like a hospital room than a prison cell. Amira was sitting on the bed, her arm properly bandaged, and an IV line providing fluids. When she saw Marcus, her face showed relief mixed with apprehension. How are the patients? She asked immediately. Both will survive, Marcus replied. The boy is doing well after surgery. Thank you, she said quietly. You saved their lives. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed. Amira, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded. Are you really Iranian intelligence or are you working for the Americans? Amira was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer carefully. I am Captain Amira Nazari of Iranian intelligence, but for the past year, I have been providing information to American forces about mutual threats in the region. My government is aware of this cooperation. So you're a double agent. I prefer to think of myself as someone working to prevent unnecessary deaths on all sides. Marcus leaned forward. The CIA wants me to work with you during your debriefing. They think you'll be more cooperative with someone you trust. And what do you think? Marcus looked at this woman who had risked everything to save wounded civilians, who had trusted him with her real identity, and who had voluntarily entered an American base knowing she might never leave. I think you've been alone in hostile territory for 18 months, and you deserve to have someone looking out for your interests during whatever comes next. Amira smiled for the first time since he had met her. Then I accept their offer if you do. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself in a secure facility outside of Dubai, watching Amira complete her final debriefing session with CIA analysts. The location was neutral territory, technically United Arab Emirates soil, but in a compound operated jointly by American and Allied intelligence services. The debriefing process had been exhaustive. Amira had provided detailed intelligence about insurgent networks, weapons trafficking routes, and foreign interference operations that spanned multiple countries. Her information had already led to the disruption of 3 major attacks planned against coalition forces and the identification of several high-value targets. Marcus had served as her liaison throughout the process, ensuring she was treated with respect and that her cooperation was voluntary rather than coerced. He had also discovered that Amira was far more than just an intelligence officer. She held a medical degree from Tehran University and had volunteered for the dangerous undercover assignment because she believed cooperation between Iran and America could prevent civilian casualties. How much longer? Amira asked as they walked through the compound's garden after her final session. Reynolds says they have enough information now. The final decision about your future status should come through tomorrow. Amira nodded, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. Despite the comfortable accommodations and respectful treatment, she was essentially stateless now. Her cover identity was blown, making it impossible to return to Iran safely, but she also couldn't simply disappear into civilian life. She knew too much about ongoing operations. Marcus, she said quietly, what will you do when this assignment ends? I don't know, he replied honestly. Commander Mitchell offered me a permanent transfer to work with CIA operations. Reynolds thinks my medical training and field experience would be valuable for future missions. And what do you think? Marcus had been wrestling with that question for weeks. 8 years as a SEAL had taught him to focus on immediate objectives and clear missions. Working with the CIA would involve much more complexity, moral ambiguity, and long-term consequences that couldn't always be predicted. I think tonight in that village changed something for me, he said. Before my job was simple, keep my team alive, complete the mission. But working with you has shown me that sometimes the bigger picture matters more than the immediate tactical situation. They reached a bench overlooking the Persian Gulf, where they sat watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and gold. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the violence and uncertainty of the past month. I have been thinking about what you said that night, Amira said, about taking an oath to preserve life regardless of nationality. What about it? In my country, we have a similar concept, the duty to protect the innocent. But politics and nationalism often make us forget that innocent people exist on all sides of any conflict. Marcus understood what she was saying. His experience working with her had forced him to see beyond the simplified categories of friend and enemy that military training encouraged. Amira was Iranian intelligence, technically an adversary, but she had risked her life to save American soldiers and innocent civilians. Reynolds told me they're considering offering you asylum in the United States, Marcus said. I know, but I am not sure that is what I want. What do you want? Amira was quiet for several minutes, watching the waves roll in from the Gulf. I want to continue the work we started, finding ways for people on different sides to cooperate instead of killing each other. That's idealistic thinking in this part of the world. Perhaps, but you helped prove it was possible. The next morning, Reynolds called Marcus and Amira into his office for the final briefing. CIA Director Sarah Chen was participating via secure video link from Langley, and Marcus realized that Amira's case had attracted attention at the highest levels of American intelligence. Captain Nazari, Director Chen began, your cooperation over the past 3 weeks has been extraordinary. The intelligence you've provided will save lives and disrupt terrorist operations for years to come. Thank you, Director Chen, Amira replied formally. We have several options for your future status. First, we can arrange political asylum in the United States. You would receive a new identity and could live as a civilian, though with certain restrictions on your activities and movements. Amira nodded but didn't respond. Second, we can arrange relocation to a third country, where you could resume a normal life under a protected identity. Several of our allies have expressed willingness to accept you. And the third option? Amira asked. Director Chen smiled slightly. The third option is why Sergeant Chen is in this meeting. We are establishing a new joint task force, focused on counter-terrorism cooperation in the Middle East. The unit would work with allied intelligence services and regional partners to identify and disrupt threats before they develop into major operations. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This sounded like the kind of work that could actually make a difference in the region's stability. The task force would need personnel with unique qualifications, Director Chen continued. Military experience, medical training, language skills, and most importantly, the ability to work effectively with people from different countries and cultures. Reynolds leaned forward. Sergeant Chen, we're offering you command of the task force's medical and humanitarian operations. Captain Nazari, we're offering you a position as senior intelligence analyst and liaison with regional partners. You want us to work together permanently? Marcus asked. We want you to build on what you started that night in Afghanistan, Director Chen replied, proving that cooperation is possible even between traditional adversaries. Amira looked at Marcus, then back at the screen showing Director Chen. What would this work involve? Preventing attacks, providing medical assistance to civilian populations caught in conflict zones, and building intelligence networks that cross traditional political boundaries, Reynolds explained. It would be dangerous work, but it could have significant impact on regional stability. Marcus thought about his options. He could return to his SEAL unit and continue the tactical missions he was trained for. He could accept asylum and civilian protection, living safely but without purpose. Or he could accept this offer and try to make a larger difference in a complex and dangerous region. Where would we be based? He asked. Here in Dubai initially, but you'd travel throughout the region as needed. The UAE has agreed to host the operation and provide diplomatic cover. Amira spoke carefully. Director Chen, I appreciate this offer, but I need to understand something. Would I be working as an American intelligence asset or as an independent analyst? You would be working as a protected person under international law, employed by a multinational task force with American leadership but regional participation. Your Iranian nationality would be known to participating governments, but your previous intelligence work would remain classified. Marcus looked at Amira, who was considering the offer with the same analytical intensity she had shown during their escape from the village. He realized that his decision would largely depend on hers. Working together had been effective because they trusted each other and shared similar values about protecting innocent lives. I have one condition, Amira said finally. Any intelligence I provide must be used only for defensive purposes, preventing attacks, not planning them. Agreed, Director Chen replied immediately. And I want guarantee that no action will be taken against the Iranian personnel who participated in my extraction. Also agreed. Major Rostami and his team have been classified as non-combatant participants in a humanitarian mission. Amira looked at Marcus. What do you think? Marcus thought about the wounded boy they had saved, the cooperation between American and Iranian forces that had made the rescue possible, and the potential for this kind of work to prevent future casualties on all sides. I think we make a good team, he said simply. Director Chen smiled. Then welcome to Task Force Guardian. Your first mission briefing begins tomorrow. 6 months after joining Task Force Guardian, Marcus stood in the medical tent of a refugee camp on the Syrian border, watching Amira translate for a young mother whose child needed emergency surgery. The camp housed thousands of people displaced by ongoing conflicts, and Task Force Guardian had been providing medical assistance while gathering intelligence about terrorist networks operating in the area. The work was exactly what Director Chen had described: complex, dangerous, and potentially significant for regional stability. Marcus's team included medical personnel from 6 different countries, intelligence analysts from allied services, and humanitarian workers who could operate in areas too dangerous for traditional aid organizations. "The mother wants to know if her son will be able to walk normally after the surgery," Amira said. Looking up from her conversation with the Syrian woman, Marcus examined the boy's leg, which had been injured by shrapnel from a roadside bomb 3 weeks earlier. The wound had become infected due to lack of proper medical care, but the damage wasn't permanent if treated properly. "Tell her yes," Marcus said. "The surgery will clean out the infection and repair the muscle damage. He'll need physical therapy, but he should recover full function." As Amira translated, Marcus saw relief flood the mother's face. It was moments like this that reminded him why he had accepted the assignment. They were making a direct positive impact on individual lives while also working to prevent larger-scale violence. The surgical tent was equipped with advanced medical equipment provided by the task force, allowing them to perform procedures that would have been impossible in a traditional refugee camp setting. Over the past 6 months, Marcus's medical team had treated over 2,000 patients and performed more than 300 surgeries, but the medical work was only part of their mission. Amira's intelligence analysis had identified several terrorist recruitment networks operating within refugee populations, leading to the disruption of planned attacks in 3 different countries. Her ability to speak multiple regional languages and understand cultural nuances made her invaluable for gathering information that other intelligence services missed. "Dr. Chen," called out Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, one of the task force's intelligence officers. "We have an urgent communication from Dubai headquarters." Marcus had adapted to being called doctor rather than sergeant during their humanitarian operations. The task force operated under diplomatic cover, presenting themselves as an international medical and aid organization rather than a military intelligence unit. In the communications tent, Reynolds appeared on their secure video link from Dubai. His expression was serious, suggesting that their next assignment would be more dangerous than providing medical care to refugees. "Team, we have a developing situation in northern Iraq. Our intelligence indicates that a major terrorist cell is planning a coordinated attack on multiple civilian targets, including several refugee camps similar to the one you're currently operating in." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. After months of providing medical care and building trust with refugee communities, the thought of these populations being targeted was personal. "What's the timeline?" Amira asked. "Intelligence suggests the attacks are planned for next week, possibly during the religious festival when the camps will be crowded with families celebrating." "Do we have specific locations?" Lieutenant Rodriguez asked. "We have 3 confirmed targets and 2 possibles. The problem is that the terrorist cell includes several individuals with medical training who have been infiltrating refugee camps as aid workers." Marcus understood the implications immediately. They're using medical access to conduct surveillance and planning. "Exactly. Which is why we need Task Force Guardian to lead the response. You have the medical credentials to operate in these camps without raising suspicion, and your team includes personnel who can identify potential terrorists posing as humanitarian workers." Reynolds continued the briefing. "Your mission is to provide medical assistance to the targeted refugee camps while conducting discreet intelligence gathering to identify the terrorist operatives. Once identified, local security forces will conduct arrests with your support." Amira studied the intelligence reports on her tablet. "These camps house over 50,000 people total. If attacks succeed, casualties could be enormous." "Which is why failure is not an option," Reynolds replied. "You leave for northern Iraq tomorrow morning." After the communication ended, Marcus gathered his team for mission planning. Along with Amira and Lieutenant Rodriguez, the core team included Dr. Hassan al-Mahmoud, a Palestinian surgeon who had joined the task force 3 months earlier, and Captain Eric Larson, a Norwegian Special Forces medic with extensive experience in conflict zones. "The challenge," Marcus explained to the group, "is identifying potential terrorists without compromising our medical mission or endangering the refugees who depend on our assistance." Dr. al-Mahmoud leaned forward. "In my experience, terrorist operatives posing as medical personnel often lack proper clinical knowledge. We could design screening procedures that would reveal inadequate training. That's good for identifying fake medical workers, Captain Larson said. But what about operatives who aren't posing as medical staff? Amira looked up from the intelligence reports. The camps have detailed registration records for all residents. If we can access those databases and cross-reference them with known terrorist associates, we might identify infiltrators who entered the camps under false identities. Lieutenant Rodriguez nodded. I can coordinate with Iraqi security services to get access to the registration systems, but we'll need to be careful not to alert the targets that we're investigating them. Marcus considered the tactical challenges. We'll split into two-person teams and operate in different camps simultaneously. Each team will have medical and intelligence capabilities, allowing us to maintain our humanitarian cover while gathering information. Partner assignments? Captain Larson asked. Marcus looked around the group. Over the past 6 months, they had developed effective working relationships based on complementary skills and mutual trust. Amira and I will take the largest camp, where intelligence suggests the cell leader is operating. Dr. Al-Mahmoud and Lieutenant Rodriguez will cover the second largest facility. Captain Larson will coordinate with local security forces and provide backup support. They spent the rest of the evening reviewing camp layouts, security procedures, and communication protocols. The mission required them to balance multiple objectives, providing genuine medical assistance, gathering intelligence, and protecting refugee populations, while operating in a region where terrorist attacks were a constant threat. The next morning, they flew from Syria to northern Iraq in a medical transport helicopter, marked with international humanitarian symbols. As they approached the first refugee camp, Marcus could see the scale of the challenge ahead. Thousands of tents stretched across a barren landscape, housing families who had fled violence in their home communities. Look at all those children, Amira said quietly, watching kids playing between the tents. Despite their difficult circumstances, Marcus knew she was thinking the same thing he was, that terrorists planning to attack these camps were targeting some of the most vulnerable people in the region. It made their mission feel even more urgent. The helicopter landed in the camp's medical area, where they were met by the camp administrator and several local aid workers. Marcus immediately began establishing the medical clinic, while Amira started interviewing camp staff about recent arrivals and any unusual activities. Within hours, they had treated dozens of patients and begun building the trust necessary for their intelligence-gathering mission. But Marcus knew that somewhere in the camp, terrorist operatives were also working to complete their own deadly mission. The race to identify and stop them had begun, and thousands of innocent lives hung in the balance. As Marcus treated a young girl with a respiratory infection, he realized that this mission would test everything. Task Force Guardian had learned about balancing humanitarian assistance with counterterrorism. Operation success would save lives and demonstrate the value of their innovative approach. Failure would result in a massacre of refugees who had already suffered far too much violence in their lives. The next 72 hours would determine which outcome prevailed.